everybody. Hello, Brian.
Hello, sweetheart.
So we're going to do an interview today, um, which we think that is really, really pertinent and relevant, and we hope that it not only brings interest but a lot of comfort as well. So it's called "There Is No Death, There Is Only Continuity." And I'm just going to say a bit about Brian. Brian is wonderful. He's my dear friend, and he's really an amazing spiritual speaker and talker and sharer and writer of some tremendous books. So I'm going to just say the names of the books, and Brian will just hold them up. So first we've got Seek Ye First the Kingdom, because these are a series of 7 books. Seek Ye First the Kingdom, book 1. Book 2 is Finding the Kingdom. Oh, book 2 is Finding the Kingdom Within. Um, book 3 is Entering the Kingdom Within. Book 4 is Living from the Kingdom Within. Book 5 is Sharing the Kingdom Within. And book 6 is Entering the Kingdom Within.
Extending.
Oh, sorry, we've had that. Extending the Kingdom Within. Yeah. Beautiful. And the book that is hot off the press, just finished, amazing book, Being the Kingdom Within. So that's great. So
There we are.
so these books, they're amazing, and it seems to me, and I haven't read them all yet, that they lead the reader more and more inwards. So I just want to ask you a little bit about them, really, how they came about, and how you see their purpose unfolding is.
Well, over the last 50 plus years, I've had so many, well, actually over a lifetime since childhood, I've had so many amazing, wonderful, mystical and spiritual experiences and encounters, primarily with the living Jesus. And I knew inwardly that by around the turn of the millennium, I had to write about this, because if I came to the point of breathing my last and I hadn't taken the opportunity to share some of these wonderful experiences, that I would be full of regret. So on that basis, I wrote book 1, Seek Ye First the Kingdom. And about 2 years after that was released in 2012, 3 people said to me within 3 weeks, none of whom knew each other, when are you going to write another book? Because we know there is one, or at least one, within you. Well, when 3 people say the same thing within 3 weeks, if you don't start to consider that, you never know what opportunities you're missing. So I started writing book 2 in 2014, and that was published in 2016. And 3 days after that was published, the Holy Spirit gave me the title of the next 5 books faster than I could write them down. So I knew that I had 5 more books to write, even though that had not previously consciously been known to me. Now, the title of these books is a progressive, sequential progress on a journey from what I describe, borrowing from King David, the valley of the shadow of death, which is this world of time and place, what I call the consciousness of fear, ascending the hill of the Lord, which is from Psalm 24, until we arrive at the place where we are spiritually awake, just like Jesus is fully spiritually awake, and that is our destiny. So, excuse me. So I wrote these books, which were published a year apart, all on Easter Sunday. And this was, I didn't really know what I'd written until the words came into my awareness as I was writing, mostly. Although I may have had an idea of what I wanted to say, new information came through into my conscious mind as I was writing. So I knew that I was being guided, and that this venture of writing 7 books was a collaborative venture between me and Spirit, which has been amazing. And it's basically talking, the thread is the kingdom of heaven on earth, which runs all the way through the 7 books. And that, excuse me, that is the destiny of humanity, to awaken to the place where Jesus was 2,000 years ago, bringing and living and manifesting, expressing, extending, and sharing the kingdom of heaven on earth, which is limitless power for creation. And the power for creation is love. And that's what we are now in the late stages of the final phase of this 3-epoch awakening program, what Jesus started calling the Great Rescue Program to me back in the early 1970s. So this is talking about complete wakefulness, the state of being consciously aware, not just of time and place in a limited sense of being in one location, in one moment of time, but the connectedness between the whole of humanity and indeed every living thing. And so the title that has been given to this discussion is "There is no death, there is only continuity." And continuity is not just about a linear process where we arrive in a body from a state of consciousness pre-embodiment, and then post-embodiment we continue. But this is also a state of connectedness between every living thing. It's not just between humans, it's between animals. Everything that is alive is part of the wholeness, the oneness that is the life within us all. So there are going to be a lot of changes coming. They've already started and they're continuing. And that's why the continuity. So connectedness is awareness at a much higher level than the physical consciousness, using digital and electronic communication devices. This is all about mind to mind, or heart mind to heart mind communing. And we can do that starting with the living Jesus, which happened for me in 1967, when he appeared to me in a basement lodging. And that began for me the last 50 plus years of awareness of the living Jesus right here. He's here in the midst with us right now, with us all. Okay, so I'm not going to go on anymore in this discussion about my connectedness with Jesus, because that was discussed extensively in the first discussion with Amanda, which was entitled He is Real. Jesus is alive and real now. But what I like to do in this discussion is show some examples of my connectedness and the continuity of life post-embodiment, which most people think of as being death, and for which there is no such thing. We've just made that up because there is continuity. And I have had more encounters with souls who've laid aside their body and are now in the etheric counterpart of this world, or the spirit realms, which is absolute, incontrovertible evidence that these souls have survived laying aside their body and are just the same people as they were while they were with a body. And it is not the body that is what we are. It is our heart and mind that is who we really are, and that continues. So these encounters have come to me mostly uninvited. They were brought to me from loved ones and guides in the spirit realms because there was awareness of a connectedness between me and them. And I could give a few examples of this. The first thing I want to say, though, is of the scores and scores of people that I've encountered, some have been globally well-known names. And so I've avoided using these names mostly because in every crowd, there's someone who wants to throw stones. And, so I would end up being called a name dropper. Well, who is more famous in the whole of history than Jesus? And I have written about him endlessly and will speak about him endlessly with anyone who's willing to listen. So here's one name that I could talk about that I think probably everyone alive today knows of, even if he passed away or laid aside his body before many were born in 2021. So would you like me to give an example, Amanda?
Oh, I'd love it. Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask about, is it by any chance Elvis Presley you're talking about? Because I'm dying to hear about that one.
Okay. Well, yes, it is Elvis Presley, and I've never spoken about him before, but because of the idea that people think, oh, he's just a name dropper. I was Julius Caesar or whatever. And so Elvis Presley, we call him Aaron because that's his middle name. And that avoids people raising their eyebrows if you mention Elvis. So they haven't a clue who I mean about Aaron. Now, during our communion, mystical communion with Christ services, we would have awareness brought to us from spirit of different people. And quite often, these individuals were in a bit of a psychic fog, and they were kind of halfway between time and eternity. And one of them, some years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, was Elvis Presley. Now, he was in a bit of a fog. He didn't really know how to make a connection with the light. And I believe that the primary reason for that is that his life had been manipulated by people who wanted to make money out of him. And he got into a way of life that wasn't natural to him at all. And it was pressure about money and fame. So we started communicating with Elvis, and we helped him by sending him love and blessing for inner peace and awakening to the greater reality of life beyond this world. And to our astonishment, we discovered that there had been a close family connectedness between us and the man we all today know as Elvis from 400 years ago, in which I was a farmer called Paul, and Teresa was my wife, Esther. Now, Esther came from the family farm adjacent to the farm that I was running. And Elvis was one of Esther's brothers, an older brother, and he had a daughter called Susan. Now, a few years ago, this may sound a bit convoluted, but please bear with me. A few 5 or 8 years ago, Teresa and I met a young woman called Susie, and we became very good friends, and we shared about Jesus and the kingdom of heaven. And she got very much connected with the inner life that Teresa and I were experiencing. And uh, became very close to Elvis. And she couldn't understand why he, this great famous name, would want to have a close, loving, personal, caring relationship with Susie. Well, it turned out that
Just
Susie had been his daughter.
yes. So Elvis had passed over, and it was a spiritual relationship between Susie and Aaron Elvis. Yes.
That developed in the recent years. And the reason why that happened was because 400 years ago, she had been his daughter then, and he was Teresa's brother. And there's the family connectedness. And so we've had lots of encounters with Elvis. On one occasion, when Teresa and I were in the Netherlands, we were walking down the main shopping area in Herzogenbosch, and there was a music shop, and we'd been chatting, and suddenly we almost bumped into a full size cutout standing in the street of Elvis. And he came like this, and whoa, there was an explosion of awareness of not just of a cardboard cutout, but the real live Elvis was there with us and had been all along. So the connectedness and the continuity continues. Now, he has been grateful to us because we helped him to escape from the fog that he'd been in since laying aside his body, whenever it was, 20 or 30 years ago, I believe, maybe longer than that. So that has been a continuing relationship. Elvis is alive. I know that there's lots of talk on the internet about Elvis is alive and he's living on the far side of the moon or whatever. Uh, but he really is alive and much better than he was now because he's spiritually open to the love of heaven, to the love of Papa God, and of our elder brother Jesus. That is the present situation with our brother Elvis.
Wow. That is absolutely amazing, and it's lovely to hear that, because people that become massive celebrities, for the most part, are the people who seem to be in the most dire trouble, because
Yes,
we all think that we've got enough things that come to us, that we are bombarded with material life and desires and all that. But when somebody's as big as Elvis or somebody like that, you can't imagine the kind of, if you multiply that by millions, the desires and the fact that everything can be brought to you, whether it's women or things, it's constantly, and it certainly seemed that he got very lost.
sidetracked
Yeah, very
by
much.
this world.
And it's really wonderful. And people who listen to this, hopefully, will attract people that are very open and connected to this, and there'll be people that won't be, and we bless them too. But it really is lovely, and why not? We're all connected. So this connection, you can think of somebody, and they're thinking of you, as it says in A Course in Miracles. It says there are no private thoughts, and there are no private thoughts whether you're apparently materialized on this side, or you've passed over. The eye of your being still continues. It doesn't
Yes,
it doesn't die at all. So
no,
why not? Of course, there's no doubt in my mind that you can connect with anybody just by having a love and wish to.
Yes. Now, there's another example that I'd like to share, which is amazing. And this has only come to me in the last very few days, and I'm still rather reeling from how amazing it is. As discussed in my first book, Seek Ye First the Kingdom, we have offspring in spirit, and the oldest of them is who would now be 51 years old in earth terms, is named Peter. And we've had awareness of Peter since he was barely walking throughout our journey. And now I'm taking half a step sideways because not many weeks ago, I was contacted by somebody called Pam, who lives in Texas. And her story is that, and you'll see how this is all connectedness as this little story unfolds. Pam has a son who he was 48 years old when he had a stroke. And this stroke completely shut off his power of speech. Nobody knows why, and the doctors all think he should be dead, but he's very much alive in all respects, except that he can't speak. And that was upsetting Pam, his mother, because as every mother knows, the mother love is forever. So she couldn't communicate with him because although he was living not that far away, a few miles away, the pandemic meant that she couldn't go to see him. And the only way she could communicate with him was by text, which he could read, but he couldn't speak. So she saw the interview with me on Buddha at the gas pump. And when she came to hearing the part where I described about our son Peter in spirit, this really pushed her buttons. And so she wanted to contact me to say, is it possible to have mind-to-mind communion, not just with people who have passed away, but with people who are still in their embodied life? So I replied, well, I'm not entirely sure in the sense of not having any experience of it because I haven't needed to, but I believe that mind-to-mind communing is the way of the future, where we'll no longer need digital devices and telephones and so on, because we'll be directly connected mind to mind. And so she explained about her son, Robert. So I said, well, I've no personal experience of this, but in principle, there should be no reason at all why it's not possible to mind to mind commune with anyone who is embodied, whether they can speak or hear or not, because those are only our bodily senses and abilities. So it turned out that Robert, her son, who lives somewhere in Texas, was already aware of me. I have never heard of him or their family, knew nothing about them at all, but he was already connected to me. And it was he who had guided from his embodied, but not able to speak state of being. It was he who had guided Pam to watch the interview with me on Buddha at the gas pump, because he knew from his universal connectedness, which we all have but aren't consciously aware of, except that we're now awakening to that. The beginning of the awakening is taking place in these times. So she contacted me and I said, try it and see what happens. Well, she started sending thoughts to Robert, her son, and he said, mind to mind. This was all mind to mind, nothing written, nothing texted, nothing spoken. This was all mind to mind. And he said to his mother, Pam, I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you to connect with me. And you need to listen to what Brian has to say. He already knew all about me, and I didn't know him from Adam. So now he and his mother have been connecting mind to mind for now several weeks, and it's just getting better and better. And he knows what she's going to say or ask mind to mind before she's actually had the thought. And he replies instantaneously. There is no delay at all. And then a few days ago, she sent me an MP3, is it, about a music recording, an MP3, I think it's called, of some music. And it said, this is Peter's Waves. And I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know who Peter was, whether she was talking about the Apostle Peter or somebody else. I listened to the music. It's about a couple of minutes long, and it was a piano accompanied by other synthesized musical sounds, including human singing, not words, but musical vocalization. And so I then spoke with her recently, a couple of days ago, and said, I don't know what this Peter's Waves or Peter's Wave means. Please explain. And she said, this is your son, Peter, in spirit. I said, are you telling me that you are in contact with Peter? And she said, well, he's been in contact with me, arranging for us to get together. And he somehow, I know from 50 years ago, or no, 40 years ago, that our son Peter in spirit is an absolute whiz kid at anything electrical, electronic, digital, computers, synthesizing sound, whatever. And I've had experiences. I could talk about that for a long time. So he, I can't think of a better word than composed. And Pam told me that she sits at the keyboard with not a thought in her mind about what tune can I create here. And the notes or the tune, the sounds, the music comes to her as she is sitting there, and she's hitting the keys on the keyboard, completely guided from spirit, without any involvement by her except hitting the keys. And she's also got, this is an electronic piano, which she can add other synthesized sounds, including the sound of human vocalization and other instruments and so on. And so Peter, our Teresa's and my beloved son, Peter, had given her this piece of music, and she recorded it. And that was for me. She sent it for me with a note saying, it's now your turn, your time to start walking on water.
Wow, Brian.
Well, I was,
how
you
beautiful.
can imagine, when I told Teresa what had been said with Pam and played that recorded sound, we were both in tears because, and it's welling me up right now, our beloved son, who never made it through to embodied form, but grew up in spirit and has been close to us ever since. But we now know that he's much closer to us at a spiritual level, a mystical level, than we had any awareness of until now. So here we've got Peter in spirit, Robert in Texas, who's had a stroke, can't speak, and his mother Pam. And Peter and Robert have been working in cahoots with each other. Peter from spirit, Robert in embodied form across the ocean, and his mother, all manipulating the stuff of dreams, getting us connected. Now, I don't know the objective, the ultimate objective of that, but I do know it's at a very high level. And the purpose of this will unfold in the coming days, weeks, months, whatever. She's an amazing woman, Pam. I have had only one conversation with her on WhatsApp, and the rest has all been by email, but there's going to be plenty more. And she is very aware of Jesus and what's going on in the world. So it's amazing.
Well, it's so beautiful and so amazing, but because, you know, this is what we're talking about, and just to back that up with absolute more proof, this is exactly what I've experienced too. So first of all, just really quickly, I learned to do what you're talking about, which is known as remote viewing. And it was when my husband was very, very ill in hospital and we didn't have a car and I was a long way from the hospital. And one night I sat up in bed and I thought, I just want to know how he is. And I had the strongest feeling he really wasn't doing well at that moment. So I thought, well, I'm just going to have a look. And something said to me, do it this way. First of all, imagine his face. And once you've got his face, just open it up a bit and try and imagine, not imagine, try and look and see what's around him immediately. And then go further back as if you had a camera and look. And I saw, as I did this, him, and then his hospital bed, and then the room. And I saw right at that moment nurses and doctors coming in and out as if they were trying to save his life. And at where I was at home in bed watching this, I was terrified for him. Knew I couldn't reach him, so I actually rang. I did ring somebody that I know who was a healer as well, because I was a healer. And I said, and it was 2 a.m, and I said, he was called Brian. I said, Brian, please just help me with this healing. Help me, and I'm going to do it, remotely. The next day, I went to visit Alan, my husband. He had left me a message on the answer machine just before saying, I think I'm dying, love, and I just want to say goodbye. But I didn't get it because I didn't listen to the message. But I did find it later. And he said to me that just when the nurses and doctors were crowded round about to give up, he said, I saw a large two figures at the end of my bed, a larger one and a little one. He says, I knew you were the little one, I just didn't know who the bigger one was. And he said at that moment it completely turned. I just started to breathe again, everything went down, everything was fine, and here I am. But this is the message I'd prepared for you, played the message. And from then on, I used to do it loads. If I was worried about somebody, I'd remote view into them. And I remember seeing people upset, and then I stopped because I thought, hang on, I can really do this. So this is intrusive. And if I haven't asked their permission, I'm not going to do that. So I stopped really. But I used it for when people were very ill, like somebody that I knew was in a hospice. And I used to physically visit the lady. And then one day when I knew she was very ill, I decided to remote view. I walked down the ward, went to her bed and sat next to her. Later on, one of the nurses told me that she had seen me in some awful pink dressing gown. I would never wear a pink dressing gown. But she saw me, she knew me because I'd been up to visit, walk down the ward to this bed. And I've had other people say that they've seen a light in the bedroom when I've been working on them. So for a start off, I know that's true. Secondly, when my husband died, I was told at 3 a.m. every morning, because my conscious mind was too tired, to sit at well, it was then called a word processor. I'd sit there like your friend, completely blank, and he'd start dictating. And then the next day I'd read it and I couldn't believe it. And finally, at the moment, I'm doing some devotional music, and I was given everything, you know, about this. I was told to make this music, and I hadn't known what to do, and I sat there. I sit there, this, you know, and I'm told the notes. I am given the notes. I feel the presence of Mary and Jesus and Hildegard von Bingen, and I am given the notes, and I ended up really quickly with 10 songs, 10 chants. I don't know how I did them. We're going to make them into an album with a friend of mine, and it's for dedicated to the book's called Choose Only Love, received by Sebastian Blacksley, and you know, I even was told that you need to get a Indian harmonium, and this was donated by, bless him, Glenn Hoverman, who publisher of Choose Only Love, and Cole Brown, who is you know, a great friend who also works on that team. And I've just been given the notes. You know, it's so, Brian, I know exactly what you mean. So over to you.
Well, so although the title of this discussion is There is only continuity, there is no death, there is only continuity, the point that I want to try and get across here is that continuity is not just a linear process, pre-embodiment, embodiment, post-embodiment, next body, but it's the connectedness that is part of the continuity. And this is the true nature of every living thing. These flowers behind me here, they are conscious. They have their own consciousness, and we are connected. We hear about Prince Charles hugging trees. Well, and the world at large tends to scoff at such an idea. But trees are alive. Trees have their own consciousness. It's not just humans, animals. Anyone who's ever owned a dog or a cat, but particularly dogs, their level of connectedness to humanity is exceptional. It doesn't matter that they don't speak the English language or any other language. They have their own way of communicating, and they're very, very efficient at it. They can tell us when they need to go for a walk or whatever, as you will know, Amanda, only too well with Howard. So the connectedness of every living thing it is constantly there. We're simply filtering it out of unbelief, doubt, fear, guilt, all the usual aspects of darkness that are with which we are veiling the
And
light of our being.
yes, and laziness, because you know, it takes a little bit of effort as well. It's important to be committed to it.
Yes, yes. Well, but it's only effort. It's only effortful when we don't have the desire, because the first thing that is essential to our spiritual progress is desire. We have to have a desire, and it has to come from here. It's nothing to do with here. That's the intellect, the ego's way of distracting us from our heart centers. And our heart centers are all about love, and love it's everything. It is the whole reality of creation. Love is the power of creation. It is the power by which everything that is good and beneficial for every living thing comes into our presence, into our experience, and we can attune with that. And if we have the desire, then it starts to happen. Well, in the 1960s, I had the desire to know Jesus. And that grew in me to the point where it was was like an ache in my soul. So I don't want to use the word desperate, so earnest was my desire to know the real Jesus, not the Jesus who the church tells us died on the cross for our sins and so on. This is the Jesus that has nothing to do with institutionalized religion, but is about spirituality. And so the desire arose from within me and had been going on through previous incarnations and had come to the point where now it was ready to start opening up and becoming operational in this embodiment as Brian. And so that's when the journey began. So this is where my journey, my personal journey with Jesus really began. Now, I've rehearsed all that in the first video, the first discussion with Amanda, which is he is real. Jesus is alive and real now. So the journey is one of not just continuity, but one of connectedness. And in this embodiment, I'd just like to talk a bit about the fact that I have two sibling brothers, Ian and Mike. Ian, who was 4 years my elder, laid aside his body in May of 2020, and Mike, who was 3 years my elder, laid aside his body at the end of December 2020. So they're both in spirit. Now, when Ian was near the end and he was in a coma, my nephew, his son, telephoned me at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night in May last year. And he said, Dad is in a coma, he's unresponsive, and he's obviously not long for this world. But because hearing is the last thing to go, if there's anything you want to say to him, I can hold the phone against his ear and he'll be able to hear you. So I spoke to him, told him that I was glad of our relationship, that we had a blessed sibling relationship for which I was profoundly grateful, and that I love him. And when I'd finished, after about a minute, Dan, my nephew, took the phone and he said, Dad heard every word you said because his eyelids were fluttering as you were speaking, and he hasn't had any eye movement for hours. And when you had finished, he raised his head off the pillow. So that is absolute indication that he, although he was not long for this world, he heard everything and was responding in the only way he could. Well, that was Saturday night. Sunday lunchtime, Daniel phoned to say that he had breathed his last. In the small hours of Monday morning, 12 hours or so later, Ian appeared in the bedroom, and he was standing there, large as life. I was fully aware of him, and he said 3 words: I'm okay now. Now, he'd had a fairly traumatic life of lots of different experiences, but he was completely calm, and he said, I'm okay now. Well, the next Monday morning later, when I was in the office here sitting at my computer, I was actually proofing the manuscript for my last book, Being the Kingdom Within. Now, I was aware of him standing about 6 feet to my right. I had been proofing the manuscript for book 7, Being the Kingdom Within, and I was reading off the screen silently in my mind, whatever chapter I was on at that point. And to my amazement, Ian was actually listening. He wasn't reading off the screen. He was listening to the words that were going through my mind as I viewed them, reading line after line on the screen. And he was hearing. He wasn't reading, he was hearing the words from my mind. If that doesn't show that minds are connected, and it's nothing to do with bodies, whether he was, in fact, his ability to connect mind to mind is now with him. He's realized its reality, which he was in denial of all that while he was still with a body. And he has been around, and he didn't want anything to do with spirituality or metaphysics, anything like that. He was very much against it, didn't believe in any of it. But it didn't take him long after he laid aside his body to realize that he had been mistaken. And he has undergone, that's 11 months now since he went, he has undergone a radical transformation in his attitude. He is all for continuity. He's all for the journey that Teresa and I have been on with Jesus, and the experiences that we have had and that I've been sharing through these books. He's absolutely gung-ho for it. Now, when Mike laid aside his body, our middle brother, at the end of December last year, 2020, within not many days, when I was again sitting at my computer, working on the stuff that I've devoted my life to, Ian appeared, and he had brought Mike with him. Now, Mike also was fearful about spirit and death and so on. And he'd had a rather traumatic demise, but now he was over that, and it takes moments for those who are ready to leave all that, the trauma and the drama of what some people still experience. Many people will experience if they've got cancer or whatever, some terrible wasting condition. So Mike was there. Oh, I've just remembered. I was actually on Skype talking to a very dear friend of ours, Linda, who is fully with us all the way with Jesus. So we were talking about what we talk about, the kingdom of heaven on earth, etc. And so I said to Linda, Ian has brought Mike, because she knew that they'd both gone, and Mike's here. And Linda, the character that she is, immediately with great enthusiasm said, he's been on my prayer list, and now I can really add extra blessings and love. Well, Mike was absolutely thunderstruck. Why would anyone who doesn't know him and love him and care for him, why would anyone want to send love and prayers and blessings for me? Who am I? This was Mike. And he staggered back when he heard Linda speak these words. So the connectedness is there. And now Ian and Mike are around, as are my parents. They're around. They passed in the 1990s, and we're all connected. And there is continuity in the connectedness. And my parents, in this incarnation, we had a relationship in former incarnations. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a parent or an offspring or a sibling or a cousin or a friend. We're all connected. There is no loss of connection with demise. Now, there must be, how many people have this awareness of spirit? Is it thousands around the world? Is it tens of thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands? Is it millions? Assuredly, it is very large numbers, even if only a modest percentage of humanity. And I believe personally that most people have mystical or spiritual or metaphysical experiences, but fear shuts them down on it. And they say, oh, what was that? Oh, it must have been my imagination. And so they've got this veil in front of their awareness so that they're in denial of reality. And anyone who is open will start receiving, because our loved ones in spirit are communicating with us. They're with us. We're one. We're connected. There is continuity. I could go on.
I think you know, you're absolutely right, and you know, it's one of the reasons that we're doing this video, because now it's just become so many more souls that are experiencing this connectedness and being open
Yes.
to it,
Yeah.
and people like Dr. Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon, brain surgeon, who always was saying to everybody, oh, there's no such thing as life after death, because it's to do with oxygen limited to the brain and all sorts of this. And he was one of the foremost people, a Harvard professor, one of the top people about brains in the country, always saying this, until he was in a coma and had a terrible illness, and was out for 9 hours. He was actually in heaven, and he's, as you know, because we've both read it, and I read it again just before this interview as well, because it was just so wonderful, and it's called Proof of Heaven.
Yeah.
And people like him, it makes people sit up and listen,
Yeah.
you know. And there's more and more, you know, doctors and scientists. I mean, doctors and scientists get ill, you know, apparently die, go into comas just like anybody else, but now some of them are actually being brave enough, despite their professional colleagues, to talk about it for the benefit of all.
Hallelujah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Evan Alexander, he had, according to all the medics that were monitoring all the signals from his brain and bodily functions and so on, they actually said that his, I think it's called the brain stem, was completely dead. And when that's happened, that is the clinical definition of being dead. And so there were no monitorable activities going on in his brain or any other part of his body. He was breathing because he was on a breathing apparatus. And all the medics said that if he was able to return to his embodied state, he would be nothing more than a vegetable for the rest of his life. Well, he came back from this apparently clinically dead state where there was no brain activity at all, the absolute definition of death. And he was interviewed on Buddha at the gas pump very, very recently, and he's fully functional and operational. I'm going to write to him because he had an experience with a butterfly in his departed state, and just bear with me. My second book has a butterfly on the cover, and can you see there's a tiny butterfly there, and that's on the spine of all my books except book one, because I had a ride on the back of Jesus as a butterfly. And well, that's in book two. I'd be happy to, the explanation of it is at the back of the book, and I would be happy to, it's only a few hundred words. Author's note about the cover illustration. I could send the text of that for anyone who doesn't have this book. Author's note about the cover illustration. And at the end of this, he invited me to climb on his back, and he took me for a ride, and we were soaring and banking from side to side. And at the end, he alighted, and I climbed off his back, and he resumed his human form, and we sat on a high hill on a rocky outcrop, sitting side by side, just exulting in the experience. And he looked at me and he said, now we can go anywhere together, with great emphasis on the word now. And I didn't know what he meant. And then within a moment, a second or so of him saying, now we can go anywhere together, we shot up at warp speed into the heights of heaven. And this was this is the one of the nebula that's been photographed by the European Space Hubble telescope or whatever. And that was his way of enabling me to experience going with him into the heart and mind of God. And so that is why there's a butterfly, and has been in book 1. There was an analogy given to me by Jesus about the caterpillars and the butterfly, and you've read that, Amanda. So butterflies are a wonderful analogy or allegory for awakening human spiritual consciousness. And we're now emerging from the chrysalis, ready to start soaring into the heights of heaven, into the sunlight. That's where we are on our spiritual journey, from the valley of the shadow of death, which is what this world is, to the top, the summit of the hill of the Lord. That's God, into the presence of God at the summit of the hill of the Lord. That's where we're at. And that's what these 7 books are all about, the story of the journey. It's a sequential, progressive, unfolding, awakening experience. And the timing is perfect. That's where we're at right now, emerging into that awareness. I could go on.
You know, Brian, it, this has been a real privilege for me, and an amazing discussion. Um, the Because we've really achieved what I think we both wanted to achieve, which is exactly as it says in the title, that there is only continuity, and and the connectedness, um, and everything's all happening at the same time anyway. So there's all these different stories and beliefs about reincarnation. People either believe it or they don't believe it. It's not really a case of whether you believe it or not, although I'm not going to take us down there because we're going to choose. But all I'm going to say is that because there's no time and everything's happening at the same time, of course you can, if you're sensitive enough and trained yourself enough and know about past lives or other people's, or everything's connected just the same way, with Pam and Peter and you and Robert and me and my husband, and Hildegard, Saint Hildegard, and all these. I mean, your life isn't just limited to you and who you know on this little.
Yeah.
And also the other lovely thing, just to draw everything in, is it's wonderful. I found it wonderful to hear about your brothers who weren't in the least bit interested in spirituality. And when you have siblings, as I have, that aren't interested in it, bless them, not only do they for some reason, people who don't believe in it sometimes get aggressive and
Yes, it's
very.
fear.
It's fear, and they I've been told a lot in my life, oh, everything you do and think about is complete rubbish. I completely forgive them, because I know it does seem like rubbish to them. That's the material world. But you've given us hope, talking about Ian and Mike, people that were very similar, that didn't want to know, and then they found out. I mean, it's
Yes.
great.
And it didn't take them very long at all.
Oh.
moments for Ian, hours at the most, and he was on track. And I just want to say one last thing about Ian and Mike. I know plenty of people who've lost loved ones and they grieve, and grieving is considered to be a normal, natural letting go, finding closure, whatever terms one wants. Uh, and it's grieving at their loss. And so people have sent me messages saying, we're so sorry for your loss. Well, so people have said, oh, we're so sorry for your loss. And I've said, I have suffered no loss, only a gain, because I now have two brothers that for 75 years I didn't have, because there was a gap, a veil, a completely artificial block about the true nature of our being and our relationship, put up by them out of fear. So I said, now I have two brothers and I love them dearly, and they're alive, they're well, they're with me now. And so people have said, so you're not grieving? I've said, no, I'm rejoicing, because I'm now aware of them at a level that they were unable to connect with out of fear before. And the Holy Spirit said to me, I don't know, 10 years or whenever it was ago, grieving is holding a grievance against an illusion, death. Well, if that doesn't summarize it all, I don't know what does, because when we grieve, grieve and grievance obviously have the same etymological origins. So we're grieving against, holding a grievance against an illusion, the illusion of death. We made it up. It's not real. We're alive eternally, just like our elder bro, Jesus.
Oh, I've enjoyed this so much. It's so fantastic. And I felt while we've been doing this a real love. I felt spirits of all sorts of people crowding round to listen to this. So, the
Yeah.
hits you're getting in heaven are really massive.
Oh, yes.
It's gone viral in heaven.
And when they come close, the love is so, there's nothing in this world that comes within a country mile of the love of heaven. Not just God in some remote high up there somewhere awareness or situation, but it's our loved ones who are our siblings, our parents, whoever, people that, like my beloved son Peter and the rest who didn't make it through. But Peter, he and I have and Teresa, of course, have a connection, and it goes back to, I'm aware of the connection we had with him in the 1600s. And now it's moving towards a much bigger state of progress in terms of the Great Awakening that we're in the midst of right now. Well, what can you say but hallelujah?
Well, hallelujah for this. It's gonna. I think it's just gonna be such a joy for so many people. I hope so. Oh, it comes to all of you who watch it with our blessing. The
Yes, very much so.
yeah, we really have had tremendous proof of this, and it's really just, yes, being open to it, and
It's a great joy
it's
to
a,
me to be able to share. Thank you, Amanda, for this opportunity. It's it's a blessing beyond human imagining to be able to share the reality, because we're sending out that love and light energy into the universe for all who are ready to receive it and be blessed by it. That's why we're really here.
it's Brian. Thank you so much, and you know, I've just loved it. I always love every precious moment of time that we spend together. So thank you.
Likewise. Likewise. Thank you, Amanda. Bless you, sweetheart.
Bless
Until
you.
next time.
Until next time.
Bye now.